the New World Order, and the conspiracy to cover it up, the shadow government's agenda in keeping us asleep, the injustice, catastrophe, and the global chaos are all indications that we are living in a period of time known as the end of days. Are you looking for answers? They are out there, and together we will find them as we navigate through End Times Now with Bree.
How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of End Times Now with Bree. I'm Bree. Here, the topic of conversation that I have between me, myself, this microphone, and your ears is the end times. And a whole bunch of other stuff that the New World Order is doing. And lots of Bible stuff, prophecy, so on and so forth. Still looking for people who have something to say and want to go ahead and tell their story. I have several people lined up, and I'm really excited about that. Thank you so much for reaching out to me, you guys. Just hang tight with me because I can't really do anything until we move. And so we are getting there. So just sit tight with me on that. I appreciate your patience. Also, if you guys really want to help us out, please download the Spreaker app to listen to these episodes. We're on all kinds of platforms, but and now we're on Apple, although I don't know how long we're going to stay there because I don't think they like me very much. Whatever. But you can, a lot of people listen on Spotify. You can rate on Spotify, so on and so forth. And you guys know how to find me, right? Like, if you have any ideas or even prayer requests or questions, whatever, you can always email me at endtimesnowwithbree@protonmail.com. And pretty much every platform, Facebook, Twitter, X, and, the gamut, End Times Now with Bree. So, let's roll, shall we? Okay, so in starting this podcast in general, this was like a major leap of faith. If you have come over from Chad and Sherry's podcast, who they are Investigate Earth Conspiracy podcast, then you guys know how this whole thing came to be about. If you have not heard of Chad and Sherry, go check them out. It's Investigate Earth Conspiracy podcast. They're a lot of fun. And they're the ones who encouraged me to do this. I'm so grateful for them, because they literally held my hand. Like, I had no idea how to do anything on this, at all. And rather than just kind of throw me to the wolves, Chad literally gave me like a list and said, this is what you need to do. And then spent hours on the phone with me, helping me. So huge blessing in our lives. If we hadn't moved to South Carolina, and if you guys don't know that crazy story, go back and listen. I think it was on The Inevitable Question Why, but we would have never met them. And so there you have a hindsight is 2020 sort of scenario. And since getting started with this podcast, my family has taken quite a bit of spiritual shrapnel, so to speak, and it's come from every angle. But God has shown that he is absolutely, he has his hand on this thing. And like all the bombs that are going off only make us see clearly that we're doing the right thing and that he's in control. And that too being said, I'm getting an amazing amount of encouragement and support from you guys out there. And I just really wanted to let you guys know how grateful I am to you, because someone always seems to know when I need to hear it. Okay. When I need to hear it, someone always, decides that it's time to go ahead and send that message. And so I just really wanted to thank you guys for that. I really do love you guys for that. Thank you so much. But this journey has brought about many blessings, many blessings, and many confirmations that are literally just in time. Okay. And God has placed some people in our path that are without a doubt major players in helping to kind of ease the load that we're carrying. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of stories regarding some of these people because they are instrumental in this saga a la let's move the Zoltowskis all over the place because good story. Okay. And all I know is when I'm like, I look at our life and I just think to myself, there better be some popcorn in heaven, dude. Like there better be, because if I were watching this movie that is our life, I'd be popping me some corn. Okay. That's all I'm saying. But I thought of something, okay, when I was thinking about this and I thought, what if manna is popcorn? I know that's so stupid, but think about it. So, of course, I laugh, right? But think about it, because after I thought about that and cracked up, my ADD took over and I was like, well, wait a minute. Oh, what is this? And so when you go to the Bible and you look up manna, Strong's Concordance says that it's the bread from heaven that fed the Israelites for 40 years of the wilderness wanderings, right? However, manna literally means, what is it? Like, literally means, what is it? It says that literally a whatness, so to speak. So basically, these people are out there going, so we got to eat that? What is that? We got to eat it? And so they would grind it into flour, okay? They could make it taste like sweet cakes and pastries, but also flatbreads. Okay, so you have both the sweet and savory. And so then I was thinking about it and I'm like, does heaven have like a popcornopolis or a popcorn factory up there somewhere? And God's just letting it just fall down. Because, if you want sweet popcorn, you can have sweet popcorn, right? Caramel corn. And if you can take, you can certainly take flour or take the kernels and grind them and make flour, right? So, and then we know that the manna melted every day, right? So here's my thing. I have decided I'm going to make some popcorn and then I'm going to go throw it outside. I'm going to go throw it outside and see if the dew melts it, because I think that will happen. Anyway, these are the things that go on in my skull sometimes. I know it's totally ridiculous, but okay. So I wanted to tell you what happened and then let you know how to get in touch with these beautiful people in case you ever find yourselves in a situation where you might need them, like I don't know, saga, a la whatever your last name is, and move around everywhere. But so we have this camping trailer. Okay. We have a Keystone Bullet and we didn't know what to do with it because our truck could not pull it. It could pull it on flatland. Like we can pull it in Michigan all day, but we couldn't pull it up there through the mountains. So there was no way that it would have gotten through there. So we tried to sell it, but no one would bite. We just finally were like, okay, God, what do you want us to do with this? Because it's a monthly payment. We're headed to my mama's basement, right? Like storing costs, money, and just so many things. We were just like, we don't have the right truck. Like we were stuck. Okay. And so my good friend says, hey, why don't you just rent it out? And I was like, yes, of course. That's exactly what we're going to do, because that makes sense. But then I was like, all right, well then how do we get it up there to rent it? Clearly, we are newbies at this, right? So Eric goes online and he does his awesome Ericness. And after sifting through a whole bunch of turd nuggets on the internet, he was not really discouraged per se, but it was just kind of there was a question mark put in that area because it was turning out to be very expensive. And we weren't sure that we could make it work, right? Plus, there are a ton of scammers out there. So finally, Eric runs across this guy who had lots and lots of good reviews. And he had I think it was a 4.8 on the rating Richter, right? And there were lots of reviews. And so Eric's like, okay, this is who we're going to go with. But he was still on high alert, so to speak, because we've never done this before. And so, he's about to hand over this house on wheels, basically, that literally our friends have used more than us. We've it's just, sometimes I sit there and I'm like, okay, God, why did you have us buy this thing? I don't know. But it's starting to make sense now. Literally it's starting to make sense. God's like, see? Anyway, so Eric gets to the drop off point and they're talking. He's talking with this gentleman, and it turns out that his son wrestled and boxed with my son at the same gym. So here, we got our confirmation that we needed, saying this is the door to walk through. And this man did an amazing job. He left on Tuesday evening, and he had that trailer up there by Wednesday before noon. And so this is what he does, you guys. He buys cars. He tows them up north. He's a shipper. He ships things up north. So, and apparently he tows campers. So, it leads me to believe that he can take anything anywhere you want him to go. And so that being said, he's probably your guy. Plus he gave us an amazing deal. So he just really made the experience, very easy. Okay. And when you're going through something like this, you need that. So I wanted to give a shout out to John. So John, I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. I believe it's Guidus. And so I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but I'm going to make sure and leave John's contact information in the description for you guys if you know of anybody who needs some towing done or some shipping done that might be your guy to go to. Next, and so thank you, John, for all of your help, by the way. Next, I would like to introduce Mrs. Mackenzie Brockett with Remax Summit. So listen, if you need a realtor, no matter where you are in this country, I want you to give this woman a shout, okay? She can get what you need. So just ask her, whatever it is. If you need a realtor and you're in California, ask her. But I wanted to talk about what a blessing her and her husband are. Okay. And this is just another thing, right? Just another story to go along with this that is, reassuring to my husband and myself that, we are doing the right things and that God is in control. So the first time we talk on the phone, I almost got into a head-on collision on a two-lane highway. Some dude was legit driving on the wrong side of the road. And this was at night. This is at 7:30 and it's dark. And this man just about runs me into a ditch. And so I start freaking out on the phone. And she's just, very no, she's totally cool and collected on the other line. And here I am just hollering. And so I pull over into some parking lot and I finish freaking out because I have to finish the freak out session. I can't just stop. And the funny thing about this is that the freak out session was 2 minutes into the conversation. So literally this poor girl, she got a taste of the crazy before the meal had even been served. Okay. She just, but she was all calm and she was so sensitive and she was she had this soothing voice. And I was like, dude, I am sorry. But still, after all that, because she definitely could have, after that, she could have just been like, this one sounds a little sketch. I don't think I want to work with this one. But she came out to my house anyways. And I'll just say too that my home is not around the corner. Okay. Like it's far from everything. When people would say, oh, where are you moving to? I'd say Mars, because that's pretty much what it feels like. But so she comes out, and I realized very quickly, we were sitting there going over the details and plans, whatever. And I realized very quickly that she was on board with how Eric and I do things, because I told her that we do our best to let God lead, and that sometimes that looks crazy. Like sometimes that looks like not what should be done, because it's not logically, it doesn't make sense in our human brain. And, so because of that, most people would shy away, right? Well, not Mackenzie. She simply responded with, well, he's the one with the plan, And so I was like, sweet. That was what I needed to hear. So not once did she. Okay, so she did not bother me. She did not hound me. She knew what we were embarking on was chaos. Because she probably has her own chaos because she lets God lead, right? And so, she even gave me the seller's disclosure that I still have to fill out. But I promised Mackenzie it'll be done by Tuesday. But not once did she hound me. Okay, she just waited for my cues because she knew that we were waiting on God's cues. So fast forward to now. Our house is far off the road. It's on an easement, and there are huge trees that line it. And so there's huge roots as a result that make up the driveway. And it's really kind of annoying to drive up the driveway unless you have a truck. And even when you have a truck, it's still really annoying. But Eric and I, we had been moving some crush and run, which is basically a type of gravel that's used for parking lots and whatnot. And Eric did what he could by moving the rock, and trying to fill in the bumps and whatnot. He was using our side-by-side to do it. But we had to take the side-by-side up to Michigan. And last night, we drove over this stuff, and I was like, dude, we need to put some more crush and run on this and just level it out. And of course, Eric looked at me with the, I love you, but I might have to kill you look. Okay. And that was the end of that conversation, except for the little tiny tidbit that I threw in there that said, well, let's see what Mackenzie has to say about it. And so I text her this morning, and I mentioned, Eric tried to fix the driveway, but I really think that we need a machine, especially now that the side-by-side is up north. Not that Eric wanted to shovel any more of that stuff into the back of that thing, because let me tell you guys, I have done it. I have shoveled and I have shoveled and I have shoveled, and I am telling you, it's just poop. It's poopy. In fact, I'd rather be shoveling poop. I'd rather be shoveling poop. But anyway, so she says to me, hey, my husband has a tractor with a bucket and a leveler. And I was like, instant tears in my eyes, because in all reality, we're waiting on the moving trucks, right? But we have to be ready by Wednesday. We can't, we'll probably be sitting around here waiting for them until Friday or whatever, but we have to be ready. And I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this. So, everything has to be packed up, all of the shovels and everything. And so just tears in my eyes. And, we tried to hire a guy. We even tried to trade our lawnmower for it, and cash. So we were going to give him cash and a lawnmower, and it just was way too expensive. And so here, we're making plans to have her come out on Tuesday, because that's like the last day that we can do paperwork. And she tells me that her husband has a machine. And so I called her, and she answers all sweet and soothing, good morning. And I said, sweet baby Jesus, Lord mercy. And she giggled, of course, and said, you're excited. Yes, I was excited. And then I realized I hadn't said good morning back to her. So I'm like, rude. That's rude. So I came back to earth. And so anyways, she's like, yeah, I'll just bring my husband with me. He likes to work on his tractor like it's a little Tonka truck or something, And I was like, that's adorable. But then she tells me that Hubs happens to have the day off. Okay. Like, he happens to have the day off. And I'm like, that is like, what are the odds of that? Okay. I just want to know, what are the odds of that? And then I was like, okay, well, I don't necessarily want him to be working on his day off, And she's like, no, he likes to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, in all reality, it's not really a big job, for a machine. So he'll probably be done by the time we finish the paperwork anyway, So basically, the story is that this woman is the one to go to, you guys. She's professional. She's clearly willing to go above and beyond for her clients. And so I just want you guys to know that and give her a shout. I'll be sure to put all of her information in the description as well. So if you've been listening for a while, then you probably notice by now I don't believe in coincidence, right? And so my opinion is that if you are listening to this podcast, it's not by accident. So just remember that. I don't know why you're here, but it's for a reason. Okay. So, but like maybe you were looking for some answers, and I certainly don't have them all, but I know where I can find 99.9% of them. And it might not come right away either, but that brings me to the subject matter for today. So we know it's the end times, right? We know that we are living in the last days. How do we know this? How do we know that? And how do we know what to believe? Jesus says this is the age of deception. And so how do we know that? So I put together a list for you guys. These are things you can ponder on, and I encourage you to absolutely dig into this. Write down any questions that you have and set it aside, and then ask God to clarify these things for you and the truth of these things, right? He will clarify the truth of these things for you. Of course, the question is always, well, how do we know this happened or that happened? And in most, if not all cases, there is proof. That's what I have set out to do is prove, right? And in some of these past episodes, I went into some mathematical codes. In one in particular would be, it's the one that's titled The New World Order and the Suppression of Truth. If you go listen to that episode, and then you come back and you listen to this episode, you will get a much better understanding of how the mathematical sequences are how they line up and how they are able to prove that, God has his signature on the Bible and that it is the inerrant word of God. It is inspired. And so there's other codes as well. And we are going to get into them, just not today, which is awesome because literally there's so many different ways that God has enabled us to know that this is the truth. And these things are like, you can't argue them. It's not like there's no debate really, because it is what it is. It's kind of like math, right? 2 + 2 is 4. It doesn't matter what you want to say it is. It is 4, right? So this is just another aspect of his signature. And so the name of the game is prophecy. And so prophecy is described as history written in advance. And God says that he gives us these things so that we will know, quote, we will know that he is the Lord. And so basically, he's seen this whole movie play out, right? And he knew the end from the beginning. In my last episode, I included the scripture, Isaiah 46, 9 and 10, where God says, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God. and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So, like, what do we have here? Okay, well, we have Yahweh declaring that he has already seen this production, okay? And he knew how it was going to end before it even began. Before he even bought his tickets, okay, to the show. He knew the ending. And you want to know something that's pretty cool? Like, when we say that he knew the end from the beginning, he also knew about us. He knew about you as an individual, who you are, before he even laid the foundation of the earth, which is crazy, right? Because I sit there and I think about myself and I'm like, yo, my man, like, he still made me. He still made me, knowing what a nutter I am. He still made me. And so, but what this also says is that he's going to use prophecy as a tool here, right? So let's face it. I mean, if you had that ability, wouldn't you use it too? I would. So from ancient times, right? He says from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. That's prophecy, history written in advance. And he's using those things to say, my counsel shall stand. Meaning, you ain't got nothing on me, right? That's what he's saying. He says, I will do all my pleasure. So he's just like, he's mic dropping is what he's doing. He's mic dropping. And he says that he's going to use it to announce his counsel, his kingdom, right? Everything that will be left standing, and apparently it will be by him and him only. And apparently he is going to make up some popcorn, I think, and enjoy the show. That's what I think he's going to do, because he claims that he will do all his pleasure. And I feel like popcorn is pleasurable at a time like that when you're watching a movie. I don't know, dude. I just think that's savage. That is such a mic drop statement. Like, you go. Anyway, so I don't think God could ever be compared to a human, right? Except, of course, Jesus, which I'll also go on to prove that they were one and the same in a little while. But like, to me, I feel like God would be this master ninja matrix dude, right? That can sit there with his feet up, and if he wants, he can put 100 bad guys down at once simply by speaking, But I mean, actually, yeah, he could do that. Like, for real, he could do that. He could put 1 million down. Anyways, basically, there's literally no way for me to explain any of that, right? I can't explain any of that. I just know that he knew what was up before it happened, and his intentions are to let us know about it. Okay? Like, his intentions are that he wrote this playbook, and he wants us to know about it. I can't explain it. I just know that's what he said, and that turns out it's true. But first, I want to show you something that I found a couple years back, and this did a thing to me. It did a thing to me, and I'm hoping that you get what I got out of it. So, something that you need to know is that whenever you see in your Bible, I think this is too, I think only if it's a King James, and if there are words that are written in italics in the King James, then they've been added in. Okay. I don't know if this is in any of the other versions, but I know that it's in the King James. So for instance, Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2 says, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation." So when we read it without italics, Okay, because there's italics in there, and I'll show you. When we read it without the italics, or if it's online, sometimes it's in brackets. Okay, just to let you know. This is what it goes on to sound like. Behold, God, my salvation, I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord Jehovah, my strength and song, he also is become my salvation. Okay, so we have some words that were added in that I think really it's just for a I guess a measure of flow. I don't know. But for instance, the word is put in there twice, and the word my. And actually, it changes it quite a bit. So I encourage you to go check that out. But then check this out. Okay. The phrase here also is become. Okay. So he also is become my salvation. That was the end of that verse. The phrase also is become is translated from a word haya. In Hebrew, it's spelled with a hey, a yod, and a hey. And these letters are very significant in the Hebrew alphabet. The letter hey means to look or behold, okay? And it represents the divine breath of God. For example, when we see God add the hey, or the H, if you will, to Abraham and to Sarah's name, you can, with a little digging, you can see that it's God's way of setting his divine plan upon the two of them. Like he's sealing them with his breath. Okay. And so with his breath, he sets upon them his spirit, his ruach, and he changes their names as they become his. And that's a common theme, if you notice. How many names get changed in the Bible? Okay, so if you really want to do a good study, do a study on the names that change in the Bible. It's very interesting. So also, by adding the H to Abe's name, it changes his name from High Father to Father of Multitudes. And then Sarah turns from my princess to just princess, which is interesting. And what's also interesting here is that knowing that the hey is the divine breath of God, the very thing that he used to breathe the breath of life into Adam, right? There's a pictograph attached to this letter hey. It's a man with his arms raised to heaven, like as if he's praising God. So keep following me here, because next we have a yod. And I kind of want to back up just a smidge and just say Yahweh is in Hebrew. So in English, you'll see it's Jehovah, but in Hebrew, it's Yod He Vav He. And so as a result, that's called the tetragrammaton. And so when I talk about this and these two words, I want you to remember this, okay? So the yod, it's tiny. It's really small. It almost looks like a little apostrophe. And the meaning behind it is the divine point of energy. It indicates God's omnipresence in all things. And the pictograph here is an outstretched arm, as if someone is reaching for something. Okay. And so now that we come to the phrase to become, when we understand the word is haya, it's spelled hey, yod, hey. Okay. So we have the breath of God. So just track with me. So we have the divine breath of God, the divine point of energy, and then the divine breath of God again. And so there are examples of this phrase everywhere in the Bible. But for now, I just wanted to point out two of not necessarily the easiest ones, but two that are pretty significant. And you'll see why. So Genesis chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Okay, so first of all, the word "was" here it actually reads "became." Okay, because when you got back to the Hebrew on this, it says that the earth haya, okay, without form. It became without form, which indicates that prior to this, it had form, right? Because you can't become something unless you were something else prior to that, right? You're changing a state of matter, basically, is what I'm saying. And so the word "was" turns to "became." And so I need you to track with me here. So, because I could do an entire episode. I could do an entire episode on this, but I'm simply just going to ask the one question here. In Ezekiel and Isaiah, it talks about Satan having sanctuaries prior to his fall from Eden and the mountain of God, right? And so my question is it possible that God just flooded the joint and just flooded the party, right, into one giant ball of formless water and then relaid the foundation of the earth? Those verses, that text talks about Satan walking on fire, basically, right? Did he just flood it? What if earth was Satan's congregation prior to his fall? Because it talks about Satan having a congregation. What if this was all Satan's prior to his fall, and that, that's how he is still the God of this world, right? How did the earth become formless and void? You see what I'm saying here? It's definitely something to think about. But next, okay, so Genesis 1:3, "And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light." The word "be" here, okay, is also haya. So become, right? So why am I bringing this up? Because what we're seeing here is a correlation between God's command in creating something and his breath, bringing something to life, okay? So God said, "Let there be light. Let there become light." And there was light. Whatever is made is to become in order to exist, right? Does that make sense? So here we see the divine breath starts it, haya, starts it, because it's hey, yod, hey. And it started by the indication of God's presence, which is his, divine point of energy. And then he finishes it with his divine breath. Does that make sense? It's very cool. He starts it, he breathes it into existence. He starts it with the divine presence, the point of energy, and he finishes it with his divine breath. It's so cool. So now let's go back to Isaiah, except this time we're going to take out the italics and we're going to insert some Hebrew, okay? So again, Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2, "Behold, El," which means God, "Yeshua," which is Hebrew for Jesus, "I will trust and not be afraid. For Jehovah, spelled with a yod, hey, vav, hey, my strength, my song, he also is become haya." Remember, something is being created here. He also is become my salvation. So, and the word is Yeshua, by the way. So what's being created? Okay. Salvation. Salvation is being created. If you go into the Hebrew and you look up the word salvation, you will see the word Yeshua, which is Jesus. So let's read that seamlessly. Okay. Behold, God, Yeshua, I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah, my strength and song, he also is become Yeshua. Guys, I hope you can see what I'm getting at here. What this is saying is that God is Yeshua. His Father, Jehovah, is our strength and song, but Jehovah will also become Yeshua. And in his name, we find salvation. You will find that in John 17. I find it so amazing that these guys wrote this stuff, and Isaiah probably had no idea what he was writing, or maybe he did. I don't know. He probably did. I'm just saying, he didn't know what the Messiah's name was going to be, right? Let alone in Greek. That's how cool God is, right? He doesn't just do it in Hebrew and then make the word Yeshua, the word for salvation, and then, tells his mama, hey, you need to name him God with us, Emmanuel, and Jesus is his name, right? Like, that's what you're going to do. But these guys, they wrote this stuff down. And so I won't do this here, but you should take this further. I highly recommend going into John 17 and go into the Greek there. But understand that he's already done two things in that passage. Number one is he has already claimed his work finished, but he hadn't uttered those words to Telestai, okay, which means it is finished, until he was on the cross in chapter 19, verse 30. That was when he uttered the words, it is finished. Except in John 17, he already goes on to claim that his work is done. His work is finished. And so the second thing is that he asks to be one and in glory with his Father as it was before the foundations of the earth was laid. So there's two interesting things that are happening there. So one is that he doesn't utter the words, it is finished, but he already claims for it to be done, which means he knows. And then the other thing is that he is asking to be one with his Father again, like it used to be. And so, you have those two things. John 1:1 says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the Word. We also know that he knew about each and every one of us before the foundations of the earth, right? So basically, according to Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 and 10, he already knew how this play would turn out. And not only did he buy another ticket for the show, but he adds himself to the cast. Okay? Like, he could have scrapped the whole gig, you guys. He could have scrapped it all and started over, but he chose not to. He chose not to. Why? Why? He knew you before the world was made. Like, let's let that sink in for a minute. Who are you, right? Who am I? Who are we dealing with here? There's a reason why the Bible says that God is love. He didn't scrap the show. He didn't scrap the cast and the screenplay because he had already fell in love with you. He already fell in love with you. People want to say, well, if he knew that this was going to happen, why didn't he just start over? Because you were already a thing in his mind, in his heart. He already fell in love with you. So he didn't want to start over. He wanted to take his chances. And he knew what needed to be done to bring you back. So bring us all back. And so now we're going to get into some meat. Okay, let's look at some prophecies that he put in his playbook, shall we? By the way, I bet the Lions wish that they had some prophecies in their playbook. I'm just saying. Although, like I said before, if you heard my last podcast, you would know I'm totally certain that God's like, nope, guys, we're not going to allow the Lions to win this year because then that doesn't make a perfect story. For Saga a la Zoltowski. Anyway. So, okay. Here are 11 prophecies that were foretold in the Old Testament. And they were fulfilled by Yeshua. And they were documented in the New Testament. But also remember that although the disciples and sometimes their scribes kept written accounts of the ministry of Christ, the New Testament wasn't actually completed until well after Jesus ascended to the right hand of the Father, okay? In fact, John the Revelator was exiled to the island of Patmos and was around 80 years old when he was given the last book of the New Testament, which is appropriately called Revelation. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ as given to John, okay? And so it should be noted that some people like to say that Jesus was in control, quote unquote, in control of these prophecies. He chose to fulfill them. Okay. And while technically he was, because he is God, and so he is one with God the Father, he was also a man in the flesh, just like you and I. He bled. I bet you he even pounded his thumb a time or two, okay, when he was putting together chairs and whatnot. Because he was a carpenter, remember? Maybe he made a boat and he, I don't know, got a splinter. He bled. We know he bled because he bled on the cross. So he was a dude, right? Except, had he been playing on that Sunday that the Lions played, the Lions probably would have gone to the Super Bowl. I'm just saying. Also, there is that glaring thing that is he was completely without sin, so, whereas I every day, I'm like, seriously, Brianna, we're doing this? Okay. But he was a man. Okay. He came in the form of a man. He manifested himself as a man. Anyway, so he was, for all intents and purposes, absolutely perfect. Okay, which is also why he was and is still referred to as the perfect Passover lamb. Okay, why? Well, because his sacrifice was the sacrifice. It was the big dog, per se. There could be no broken bones, which is why they didn't break his legs, because God was not going to allow that, right? But there's a lot of things that went into that. And so for the naysayers out there who want to say that he could have controlled the outcome of these things, I have put this list together for you, because it would have been completely impossible for him to control these particular things on earth because he was a baby. Okay? He was a little baby. All right, so here we go. If you want to, now would be a pretty good time to grab a pen and something to write on. Also, when you dive into these, I highly recommend that you read the whole chapter, okay? And keep in mind that when you see things like, quote, in that day, or in the day of the Lord, or in the latter days, things like that, they indicate a prophecy. But also, and this is something that I'm going to get into, I'm going to do an episode on the rapture and the ages in the rapture. And there is prophetic timeline that goes along with this. Okay. And so I want you to make notes that when you read in that day or in the day of the Lord, I want you to keep tabs on that, okay? Because that's going to help you understand some things when that episode comes out. So number 1, he was the seed of Abraham. This is Genesis chapter 22, verses 17 and 18. He could not have chosen his ancestors, okay? And when you read this, understanding something, this chapter is regarding Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, which is something that I think is highly misunderstood. In verse 2, God tells Abraham to take his only son of whom he loves. Now, right there, I want to point something out here. Obviously, he had 2 sons, okay? However, there was only Isaac that God had ordained, which shows us what free will is, right? And also, he says the word love when he gives him this command. He says the word love, which is said in the manner in which a father loves his son, which is ahave or ahave. There's another one, it's agape, and that's like a brotherly love. That's like a friendship love. This particular love is how a father loves their child. And now many people freak out about this because they're like, how could Abe do this, right? How could he even attempt to go up on the mountain and off his kid, right? Well, because he knew that God would make good on his promises. God told him that he would make many nations of him, right? So how could God do that without the only son of whom God ordained? So he showed that faith by telling Isaac that God will provide a sacrifice, because Isaac says, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide the sacrifice. In fact, he goes on to name that mountain Jehovah Jireh, which means God will provide. And he does. He does provide the sacrifice. Not only did he provide the sacrifice for him with the ram in the thicket, but 2,000 years later, in the very same region, just outside the city walls, another father gives his only begotten son, of whom he so loved, as the perfect Passover lamb. Okay, John 3:16. And so this was fulfilled in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. When you find the genealogy of Jesus Christ, you see he came from Abraham's line. Number 2, he would be the seed of Isaac. That was Genesis 21, chapter 12, fulfilled in Luke chapter 3, verses 23 and verse 34. Number 3, he would be the seed of Jacob, which was Numbers 24:17, fulfilled in Luke 34. He would be from the tribe of Judah, which was in Genesis 49:10, and referenced a fulfillment in Revelation 5:5. He would be the son of David. Now, let me talk about this first. Okay, so he would be the son of David. Now, this was in Jeremiah 23, verse 5, and fulfilled in Luke 3:31. He was born in the royal family, but not by his choice, okay? And I have a solid tidbit on this at the end, but for now, I want to talk about some things that the Jews, and of course there's others out there, they have an issue with this prophecy. It's important. It is so important to understand. Number 1, it would have been customary for the Jews to speak of their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers, so on and so forth. Their offspring was always referred to as a son. Okay. And so, but there's something else. You'll notice that the genealogy, if you go to Matthew and Luke, you'll notice that there's some changes there. And the reason is very simple. God is quite clever. He made sure that his son would not only inherit the throne through blood, but also legally. And I'll touch on that in the next one. So number 4, sorry, this is number 5. He would be born of a virgin. And Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14 talks about that, and it was fulfilled in Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 through 25. Jesus could not have chosen his parents. Okay, it was beyond his control as a flesh and blood baby to choose to be born of a virgin and to plan to be born the firstborn son. Okay, but regarding this lineage, because remember, he had siblings. Okay, he had siblings. But regarding the lineage, you have to, first of all, you have to be the firstborn in order to inherit the throne. But there's also a major debate in which the Jews will claim that Jesus could not have been the Messiah because of a curse on the bloodline of Jeconiah, also called Coniah, among other names, Jehoiachin. But this is very complicated, okay? But 100% of it is squashed. It can be squashed, but you have to know what you're talking about in more ways than one, okay? But all you have to do is a little research into the bloodline of the begots regarding Jeconiah. And so I am, rather than go into that here, because I want to talk about the prophecies, but I want to give you what you need to be able to back this stuff up. And it's biblical. And it's in the Old Testament. So there's no way that anybody can refute it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and insert 2 links into the description for you. One of them is a video, and the other one is a document, an article that was written by Koinonia House, which I love them. That's where I get a lot of my stuff from, because I love Chuck Missler and that's my guy. But one of them does a really great description of describing the inheritance as far as the bloodline is concerned. And then the other one from Koinonia takes it from the legal perspective. And the bottom line is that in order for him to inherit, you have to have both. And so I want to emphasize that Jesus did, in fact, have both the blood right and the legal birthright to the throne of David. And so that way you can gain all the understanding that you need with those 2 resources right there. But then there comes Herod's slaughter of children. Okay, this is called the Innocents Massacre. And this was talked about in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 15. So before Jesus was born. And this was fulfilled in Matthew. You'll see the fulfillment in Matthew chapter 2, verse 16 through 18. And there was no way that Jesus could have planned to fulfill this prophecy because he was still just a child. And so just outside of the courtyard of the Church of the Nativity, there was a mass grave that they found, and it was chock full of baby bones. Okay, as well as adult bones, which I imagine would have been a thing, because I'm not looking to have anybody, kill my kid, right? I'm going to go down. I'm going to throw down. I'm going to go down fighting for that. So I can imagine that there were probably some adults in there too. But we also know that Herod was a loony. Okay, he was a nutter. And if you research the things that he did, you'll see for yourself. The question is why is there no written record of this, even yet, right? Why is there no written record? Well, unfortunately, back then, it was actually pretty normal to look upon infant deaths with a very casual view, okay? In fact, the Greeks and Romans used infanticide as birth control. These people. But the father also had the right to not even pick up his newborn off the floor after its birth, simply leaving it to die. So essentially, kids just were crappy for them. Some of them, they just didn't like them. I guess they weren't a big deal. Which I don't get. I don't get that. I don't get it because it's not in our primitive nature. It should not be in our primitive nature to allow that, right? But I'd say that it's a pretty good assumption that the parents, would go on to share mass graves with the babies that they did try to protect. And so this event, like I said prior to, was called the Massacre of the Innocents. And I can't even imagine how horrible it would have been. But he did it. And Jesus was saved because he went to Egypt. Joseph and Mary, Joseph was obedient to God, and he got up and went into Egypt. Then there is the prophecy, he is born in Bethlehem. So this is in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And it's fulfilled in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. So like pretty much, last time I remembered, babies don't get to determine their place of birth, right? Like that's self-explanatory. Also, check out the fact that there are 2 Bethlehems in Israel. One is it's like a hyphenated word, and it's Bethlehem, which I personally feel is the place where Jesus was in fact born. And then the other one is Bethlehem, which is one word. And if you go back to the Hebrew on this, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. There's a hint there. It's called bread. Anyway, so next we have the fact that he's sold for 30 pieces of silver. Judas, he threw him under the bus for 30 pieces of silver. And you find that in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 12, and that was fulfilled in Matthew chapter 26, verses 14 and 15. Jesus was not in a position to determine the price that would be agreeable for his betrayal. Okay, he was not going to go to the Sadducees and the Pharisees and say, "Yo, when my man over there comes over, okay, just give him 30 pieces of silver and then kiss me on the cheek, and then I'll go with your guys to go crawl up on that cross." Okay, like I don't think so. No. And then there's the prophecy of his garments. Okay, this is something else he would not be in a position to do. So his garments in Psalm 22, Jesus could not have planned for Herod to put a royal robe on him, but he did. And this robe was highly significant in that it was without a seam. That meant, for lack of a better word, that it was money. Okay, it was money, as in the highest type of Versace ever. Okay. And so Psalm 22 reads as though it's coming from Christ himself while he's on the cross. But it's important to understand that this psalm was written 1,000 years before Christ was even born. It's Psalm 22:18, and it says, "They part my garments amongst them and cast lots upon my vesture." So then fast forward to John 19:23 and 24, where it says, "Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts to every soldier a part, and also his coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from top throughout," which means it was expensive. They said, therefore, among themselves, this is verse 24, "Let us not rend it," which means let us not take it apart, okay? But cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, John saying this, which saith, "They parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture they did cast lots. These things, therefore, the soldiers did." Okay, the soldiers did it. So you see, they tore the clothes but saved the robe, and they gambled to see who would get it. So we have that in Psalm 22, verse 18, fulfilled in John 19:23 and 24. An event like this would be impossible to plan. Like, would it have been possible to convince these soldiers to do exactly as the scripture stated 1,000 years prior? Did Jesus even have money to do such a thing? I'm like right here, if I had a gavel, I would use it right there. Bam! I think not. He simply had a robe. And then, cue the gasps in the background. dun, dun, dun. Anyway, now we're going to move on to Isaiah 53. So this, in my opinion, is one of the most significant prophecies pointing to Christ, okay? And it literally starts out running, like right out the gate. There is no slow rolling here. And I'm going to prove to you that it is, in fact, referencing Yeshua. So Isaiah 53:1 says, "Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed?" Okay, arm of the Lord. So the question here is, who is the arm of the Lord, right? We're doing the W's. Well, this is quite simple. Because when we move to verse 2, it says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and that when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him." So there's one word here that indicates that the arm of the Lord is, in fact, a man. Okay, then it goes on to describe this man. Next, how do we know that this prophecy is a prophecy specifically pointed to Yeshua? Well, please keep in mind that I'm trying to simplify this, okay? But I highly suggest that you read all of Isaiah 53. And I always like to do it first in the King James, whatever it is, and then I'll go on to other versions, such as the New King James or whatnot. I'll even go to the basic Bible in English or, whatever, English Standard, whatever you feel comfortable with, okay? But I always encourage people to go back to the KJV and then go back into the original text. So the Greek and the Hebrew, because it really is the only way to get the full deal, at least in my opinion. We cannot lean on our own understanding here. And the fact is that all of the translations have been translated by man. So we need to let God speak. Okay. And if you need help here, please don't hesitate to come to me. I may not have all the answers, but I'll do my best. But we have to make sure that we get everything that we can out of it. So here is how we know the who behind the arm of the Lord. So I'm moving on to verse 6. Where it says, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all." Again, this comes down to simply reading the context of it all. Okay, so here we have the Lord had laid on him the iniquity of us all. What does that mean? Well, who is this verse talking about? It's talking about all of us, right? Everyone. And what does it say? It says that aside from the fact that we all have decided to do our own thing and turn away from God, side note, if you haven't seen that happening in the world yet, you will, that we are very much in line and parallel to ancient Israel. But God used that quote unquote arm to essentially pay for our iniquities. Okay. He literally and physically put that burden upon his arm. And this is so significant because who sits next to a king? Who is at a king's arm? The heir to the throne, right? And the Bible says that Jesus sits next to the right hand of the Father. So, you follow what I'm saying, yo? Okay, so moving on through the entire chapter, you'll start to see that all the atrocities mentioned did in fact happen according to eyewitness accounts in the Gospels. And there's no way that Jesus could have orchestrated this to go exactly the way he wanted it to, unless, of course, he was the Messiah. So I stand firm in saying, friend, by his stripes, we are healed. If you haven't gone and listened to, I think it's my second episode where I go into the Shroud of Turin. Go and listen to that because it's fascinating. And it also goes on to prove that whatever, I believe it was Jesus that was in the Shroud of Turin. But, even if you don't believe that, whoever was in that thing, they got beat up pretty bad. And that wasn't normal. Okay. So when you read Isaiah 53 and then you look for the fulfillment, you will find all of that in Matthew 27. Next, we have the resurrection. Okay. So if Jesus was not the Savior, the event of the resurrection would be beyond his control to achieve. Okay. He could have made a false prediction, and many have. Okay. Many have, but he could not have made it a reality. All right. In other words, he needed his dad. Okay. So Psalm 16, chapter 16, verses 9 through 11, you will see this prophecy there, and it becomes fulfilled in John chapter 20, verses 19. In particular, okay, Psalm chapter 16, verse 10 says, "For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." So the Holy One is speaking of the Messiah, okay, for he is the only one who could be holy, okay, as he is of God, right? So we know this, that there is no other that is holy but the Lord. And so the word corruption here means destruction, ditch, grave, or pit when you go to the Hebrew. And so this simply means that his body would literally be exempt from destruction, a grave. Okay, you guys follow? So then how could he be exempt from these things unless the very opposite thing occurred, which would have been a resurrection? Okay, so you see, Jesus, he could have predicted that he would resurrect, which he did in fact do predict, but the very act of the resurrection, that it itself was supernatural, and it was in the control of the Father, okay, of which the text also states that very fact. So darkness, here's the next one, darkness. There was darkness over the land in the middle of the day that could not be planned by Jesus, okay? Yet it was prophesied and it was fulfilled in Amos chapter 8, verse 9, and then it was fulfilled in Luke 23, verses 44 and 45. So do you remember when I said that there are several people outside of the biblical narrative? I said this a couple episodes ago, that there are people that are outside of the narrative that can confirm certain events, etc. Okay, so these are a few, and there are more, but in particular, these wrote about what we call the crucifixion darkness, okay? And there are people who like to say that it's impossible to know that this event took place due to the fact that, one, we weren't there, and two, there's no scientific proof. However, there are accounts of people writing testimony to these very things who were outside the biblical narrative. And also, there's NASA. So, lastly, it's important to know this. Just make a little note in your brain. Many people have tried to attribute this very well documented event, by the way, as a simple eclipse, okay? But I'm more inclined to say that this was more like a supernatural eclipse, because the Bible states that they were, at that time, they were celebrating two Sabbaths, okay? One was the weekly Sabbath, but the other one was called a holy high day, which meant it was a big one. It was a doozy, right? And that big one was Passover, or as the Jews would call it, Pesach. So here's the kicker. It was always celebrated with a full moon. And as it would stand, a solar eclipse would have been 100% impossible during a full moon. So therefore, the argument that the darkness was simply a solar eclipse is a failed argument. Rather, it was a lunar eclipse. And it can be proven. It can be proven. And so I'm going to give that to you in just one moment. But with that said, I want to tell you who these people are. And so make notes of this. So we have a man named Thallus, Thallus. He was a Greek historian who wrote a history of the Eastern Mediterranean world since the Trojan War and wrote his regional history in about 52 AD. So this is approximately 20 years after the death and resurrection of Christ. Although his original writings have been lost, I bet they're not lost, by the way. I bet they're sitting somewhere in the Vatican, but he is specifically quoted by Julius Africanus, he's a renowned 3rd century historian, saying Thallus in his 3rd book of histories explains away the darkness as an eclipse of the sun, unreasonably, as it seems to me. End quote. Apparently, Thallus attempted to ascribe a naturalistic explanation to the darkness during the crucifixion. The point here is that Africanus, who happens to be a follower of Christ, quoting a Greek historian who is not a follower of Christ. Okay, so we have two guys on two ends of the spectrum. And simply what he's doing is he's refuting, or rather doubting, Thallus's idea that the crucifixion darkness was simply a fluke. Okay. So essentially, he's acknowledging that even Thallus himself knew of the event. He just didn't want to attribute it to anything supernatural. Okay. Fact is, it was done by God. How else could it have happened in that very moment? And so next is Phlegon. Phlegon. I always think about the Ghostbusters when I say that. But anyway, he's another Greek historian who wrote an extensive chronology around 137 AD. And so, along with Thallus, his writings are also lost, but he's quoted by other authors as well and considered reliable by scholars simply because it's not just one author that quotes him, and it's well within the reach of people who knew from firsthand accounts of their parents' experiences in that time, as Jesus still had feet on the ground 100 years earlier. Okay, and so it would have been the same as us speaking of the events that happened in both World War I or even World War II, if that makes sense. We weren't in those wars, right? But we have an extensive knowledge regarding what happened. I have to say, though, that in speaking of World War II and not being there, I do find it interesting that and a little ironic, actually, that there are still Holocaust deniers out there. You know, I mean, the same goes for the Civil War, and even going back as far as the Revolutionary War. I don't see anyone denying those events. And we had written records and some photographs, but yet, you know, when we throw out the Holocaust, there are still people who believe that it didn't happen. And not only do we have written testimony, but we have photographic evidence and loads of video. You know, plus, I'm just going to throw this out there. Actors in film, you know, back in those days, because I've heard this before too, that it was just actors. They weren't that great, you guys. Like, they weren't that great. You know, in other words, I don't think they could have pulled off what they pulled off. Okay. If that makes any sense. If you've ever seen some of the raw, uncut videos of the camps, there are two things that are unmistakable. Okay. This is what I'm getting at. And I know that it's morbid, but I'm not going to sugarcoat anything here. Okay. You guys should know, I just don't sugarcoat, but I believe that if you guys have stuck with me this far, then you can appreciate where I'm coming from. But the corpses, okay, in and of themselves, I just don't think that people can fake that sort of emaciation and death, you know, let alone the reactions. The reactions when they knew that they were saved, okay. Also, our military made the surrounding residents walk through the camps to see what that smell was. Okay. as if they didn't know what the smell was. And the looks on their faces, they were like gagging into whatever they could, to like hold up to their faces. And that said quite a bit. Okay. So I just don't think that they were actors. I think that's impossible. Anyway, Phlegon, he states the following. He says, in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad. So that would have been 33 AD. Okay. He says there was the greatest eclipse of the sun, and that it became night in the 6th hour of the day, i.e. noon, so that stars even appeared in the heavens. There was a great earthquake in Bithynia, and many things were overturned in Nicaea. And then we have NASA. So NASA has proven that an eclipse occurred, and that it was visible from Jerusalem on April 3rd, 33 AD. Okay. But now, how about this earthquake? Okay, so obviously, we didn't have Richter scales back then, right? But geologists have been able to see seismic activity based on water levels, etc. So literally, if you go online and you look up earthquake on April 3rd, 33 AD, there will be a slew of things that pop up. But what I found most interesting is the fact that they used the Red Sea to figure out the earthquake actually happened. And what's crazy is that it's the fact that the salinity is so high and nothing lives in it, that these guys were able to tell that there was, in fact, an earthquake in that region. I mean, to me, that's crazy. And of course, I'm going to put all the links. I'll put all the links, and I've got a cool video that I'll put in the description as well. But authors outside of the Bible, okay, they also claim this fact. All right. So this is not just a biblical testimony. All right. So last thing. So Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 5 says, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall raise and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in earth. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12 says, and speaking unto him, saying, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, behold, the man whose name is the branch, and he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Which, by the way, the word is in italics, which means they added it in. So technically it would say, behold, the man whose name, the branch. So I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, oh my gosh, now she's on sticks and things, right? Okay. Well, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to explain this to you. We see the prophecies that tell us that there will be a connection between where the line of the Messiah is to come from, right? And what he will be called. So we are told that he must come from the line of David. And just so we don't get confused on some other David, even though there was only one Dave, the Bible says that he will be a rod, right? Or a root in some translations, from Jesse, who was, in fact, Dave's father. His father was Jesse. Then we can move to Isaiah 11, chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. And here's what it says. It says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. And now listen, but with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked." This is confirmed in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16. He says, "I, Jesus, have set mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am." That's a statement in and of itself. "I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." So that is confirmed in Revelation 19:15, where he says, "And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron." Right? So we have all these confirmations that are kind of going hand in hand here about who this man will be. So here's the thing. Ruth meets Boaz. If you've never read this, go read Ruth. It's like 4 chapters. Ruth meets Boaz, so Boaz turns out to be the kinsman redeemer to Naomi. Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law. And basically what happened, I'll give you a quick little synopsis. So basically what happened was Ruth's daughter-in-laws, she had 2 of them. One was Ruth, and the other one was Orna, I believe was her name, Orna. And everybody died in her family. So her sons died and her husband died. And so she's like, well, I got nothing to do here. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem, and I'm going to go hang out with my peeps over there. Except all of her land had been given away because she left. Okay. Now Ruth and Orna, they decide they want to go with Naomi. And they're Moabites, these women. Okay, they're Moabites. They're not Israelites. And so Orna, who actually is related to Goliath, just want to let you guys know that right there. It's pretty interesting. You can go and do a little search on that and do some research in your Bible, find that truth. But and if you know who Goliath is, David, he messed that guy up pretty bad. I think he lost his head. In fact, I know he lost his head. Anyways, so Orna turns around. She wants to go back to the pagans, okay? Which now we know why. But Ruth decides she wants to go with Naomi. And so Naomi is going to go back to her land, and Ruth goes with her. And Ruth, in the book of Ruth, ends up being the first Gentile bride. Okay, because remember I said she was a Moabite. She was a Moabitess. And so this is very symbolic regarding us as Gentiles. If you're a Gentile, if you are not a Jew, then you are a Gentile. And so basically what the Bible says is that we are grafted in. We are like a tree, right? We are grafted into the family tree. And as the bride of Christ is our kinsman redeemer. And so when you go and you read the book of Ruth, that will make a lot of sense. But Revelation 22:17 says, the Spirit and the bride say, come, and let him that heareth say, Come, and let him that is at thirst say, Come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. Side note, if you ever get the chance to watch the documentary Before the Wrath, do it. It's good. Anyway, Ruth and Boaz. Ruth becomes Boaz's bride. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. So he falls in love with Ruth and he marries Ruth. And then as a result is able to give Naomi back her land because he is the kinsman redeemer. And so Ruth and Boaz go on to have Obed. Obed has Jesse. And then Jesse has David. He begots. There's begots. So basically, we're seeing several times here that the Messiah is known as either a root or a branch, part of a family tree, right? Well, get this. There are two Hebrew words translated to branch. And in the branch, prophecies in particular, okay, these two Hebrew words for branch are interchanged. And for the sake of this, okay, not going on forever and ever, you can either do a deep dive in that on your own with this, or you can just trust me. Okay, it's fine. But one of the words is semach, okay, and it's used in all of the verses for branch except the major messianic links where prophecy is regarding him as a coming Messiah, okay? So all of these prophecies where it's foretold that he's coming and he is called the branch, that word is netzer. And here's the thing. When we read that prophecy in Zechariah, and it states that the Messiah will be called the branch, like literally will be called the branch, right? Well, many religious Jews will not even mention Jesus' name, okay? They certainly would never call him Christ or HaMashiach, which means Messiah, right? Because calling him Christ or Mashiach would be an oblique confession of what they don't believe. Okay, so as a result, they simply will call him the Nazarene. Okay, they will call him the Nazarene. And Christians as the Nazarenes. Okay, so they refer to him as the Nazarene, and they refer to us as the Nazarenes, or the Nazriim. And the same goes for practicing Jewish scholars as well. So the phrase, the Nazarene in Hebrew, literally means the one who is the branch. Did you hear what I just said? Netzer, okay, branch, the Nazarene, literally means the one who is the branch. Word for word. So they're calling him the branch. They're literally calling him the branch. And so I find God, in moments like this, I find him to be highly efficient. I don't think he limits his capabilities at all. I feel like at this point, in these last days, he's making his truth undeniably known. And, because he's such a nice guy, he's leaving the slightest bit of room for us to take his word on faith. Legit. Okay, like at this point, at least in my eyes, just with all of his signatures, I don't even have to have that anymore because it's just I just know who he is. He's given that to us, But of course, that's what we should do is take him on faith. But nevertheless, he gave us all these other things. So these are just a fraction of the prophecies listed that Jesus couldn't have controlled. because part of it was he was a baby. He could not control his ancestry. He couldn't control that the Jews would call him the branch. And, at least not from a secular scientific perspective. He couldn't control NASA. But, obviously from a supernatural perspective, he could control it. And he did, which is my point. So basically, I threw down 11 straight prophecies with a couple tidbits in there for you. And so if you want to know the odds of just 8 prophecies coming to pass, then go check out the episode that I did about the suppression of truth. And you'll see that there's a math breakdown there that should close that case for you. Okay. But remember, we're coming to the end here, guys. And Jesus says that he's standing at your door and he is hungry. I feel like he's a gentleman and won't just barge in. You know what I'm saying? So, and plus, my guy is classy. I know he picked up the grub. I know he picked it up and he wants to share it with you. And so if he's been knocking for a while, go open that door and listen to what he's got to say. Okay? So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. The verse for today is Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28. And when you go and you read that, I want you to go and look up Cyrus the Great, the stele, S-T-E-L-E, the stele that he carved himself, and what he did, and then understand that the scripture was written at least 250 years earlier than what was prophesied. So, got it? Thanks a lot, you guys. I appreciate you. And until next time, this is Brianna signing off, saying God bless.